Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Sunday Project. Thanks for joining us wherever you are in the world. And whether you're here because you're navigating your own recovery or supporting someone you love or working in the field or just wanting to learn more about gambling harm, we're really glad you're with us. And as always, I'd like to thank our incredible panel who volunteer their time on Sundays, different Sundays, and expertise each week. Joining us today, we have Dan Field, Mark Lefkowitz, Jared is not here today, unfortunately, Mr. Bob G, and Matt Zarb Cousins, who work passionately helping those affected by gambling harms and continue to make a real difference. We may have today appearing just a little bit late, Rob Minnick. I think he's coming in a moment, so he'll be joining us shortly. But let's begin. I'm going to do this introduction differently today so we can get straight in there because there's many topics to cover today. Oh, Rob's here. I'm just going to see where he's at. There he is. Hey, Rob.
Hey,
Good morning. Just
good
doing our
morning. I was
introduction.
I was stuck backstage. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. I'm gonna skip in-depth introductions today and just get straight in it as there's a few things to talk about today. So just to also remind everyone, we are a non-profit. We do rely on donations. If you would like to donate, please, that would be welcomed. Just to keep us kind of, you know, able to keep the lights on here. We are not funded by the industry. We offer resources. You can go on our website and click on resources. Also, on the webinar here down the bottom, there is a tab you can click on resources, and you'll see a bunch of things like Gamban, and you can find Gamanon, you can find GA meetings, you can find parents standing together if you're a parent trying to help your young gambler in the house. We also have a group that we offer on Tuesdays called Chat with Dan. We have Jordan Freeman joining that now, who is training to start up his own group to help gamblers trying to stop gambling across the nation. So please be aware we have resources on our website. Okay, I'd like to
Deb, one quick question. How can they donate money?
thank you, Mark. If you go on our website, there is a donate now button right there, and that is always there, and it will always be there. So thanks for nudging me on that one. Okay. And Sasha, who's in the in the background, who's helped us create this website and get all your newsletters out every week. We're so grateful to Sasha from Practest in Scotland, by the way. We have a genius in Scotland who helped us put all this together. So this really is an international effort. So okay, with full throttle, we go into our weekly news stories. I know, Mark, you've got something you want to cover. I definitely have something I want to bring up about Bryce Harper, and I'd love to. I saw you, Rob, this week on your podcast. Thanks for having me on, and also promoting Carlsbad Beach Recovery. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rob. Um, and I have some questions for you regarding that. But Mark, take it away with your weekly news.
Hi, this is Mark Lefkowitz here, giving you today's news stories. I picked a couple of stories today, one about another athlete, another betting scandal. Former NBA player Malik Beasley pleaded not guilty to federal charges that he manipulated performances in sports games. And prosecutors claim he manipulated prop bets, which again is creating quite havoc in sports on prop bets. And the question is really just bigger than him. When fans can now bet on rebounds, assists, points, steals, whatever, the game-winning basket, they become the betting market. One of our members here, Bob Gray, always said, we've become not fans, but become customers. And sports betting, when it originally was put out, it was supposed to be about transparency in sports, and we're just seeing the opposite. Instead, we're seeing scandal after scandal. Where gamblers, and these are well-paid professional athletes, are developing gambling problems. And I think that really goes to the point of, anybody can get addicted to gambling. And especially when we're looking at athletes who know if they gamble, it's could be career ending, Hall of Fame ending, whatever, are still and making millions of dollars, are still taking risks in gambling because, as some of us here on this panel know, once we cross that line, it doesn't matter how much money we're making, who we are, our race, color, creed, anything else. And to me, what it really shows is that anybody can get addicted, you know, and how many scandals is it going to take? I'll quite often say that there's a big disconnect between all the problems we're seeing and then legislation to curb vendors in the way they market. And Deb will talk about an interesting thing about how Bryce Hopper got involved. The other story I really wanted to talk about, which I think is a really interesting story, is Kalshi just recently donated $2 million to the National Council on Problem Gambling. And here we're talking about, they took $2 million, and the money supposedly is what we called a financial trader health and safety initiative, but somehow this seems a little questionable. Kalshi is and we all know this here, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Yet Kalshi repeatedly argues that its products are trading, not gambling. Now the company is investing millions of dollars in companies that help problem gamblers or trying to prevent. I think now the NCPG goes more for trying to prevent problem gambling. It's, the money could expand research, education, and access to help, but as always with all this stuff, no free, nothing is free. It could, there's another part of the story where can the National Problem Gambling Organization truly remain independent when significant funding, and it's not just coming from Kalshi, it's coming from FanDuel, it's coming from DraftKings. They get a big chunk of money when from the NFL. I know the initial was over $6 million. So can this, it's not just about taking money. It should be more about transparency, influence, and public trust. Because in problem gambling, obviously, problem, the problem gambling world needs to know one thing: who's funding the message, and does that funding shape what the NCPG is saying? I'm not making any comment on remaining neutral, but let's see how this thing plays out. Back to you, Deb.
Yeah, across this hour, I think you will make comments, Mark, or I'll certainly nudge you that way. There's a couple of things you just said there, big topics there. That, we've got the NCPG taking money from Kalshi that I know people are very up in arms about, and rightly so. But also, not many people know about how difficult it is. Anyone can get addicted to gambling, and how difficult it is specifically for athletes before all of this started with the advertisements and with the rise of sports betting in the last couple of years. It was difficult for athletes anyway who had gambling addiction, specifically athletes, to unravel a gambling addiction because of things like the way an athlete is focused on their sport and sports betting in general because of their belief systems, and the dopamine. And so that's very specific for the public to understand. And then knowing now how the industry are surrounding them differently, what it means to become an athlete, how athletes are now farmed, right? I say they're farmed, they're being farmed. If you're a young aspiring athlete, just know and be aware that you're not just learning about how to do your thing very well. You're also going to be in a position where you're going to make people angry. You're going to help people lose lots of money, and they're going to be angry for you not just losing the game anymore, for emptying their pockets, right? So, but I don't want to ask Dan, clinically, right? Athletes, we have our athletes coming in to see us, athletes struggling to stay sober. We don't have Jared today, but clinically, what do we know about athletes and how a gambling addiction sets the barbed wire in?
I mean, I think that in high school, if you're playing sports, there's definitely a camaraderie and a shared sense of purpose when you're on a team together. And when that is gone in your early 20s, if you don't make it to the pros, there's a huge void there. And I think gambling is a perfect addiction to kind of mimic that sense of, purpose that that was lost when a person ages out of competition in that way. And then it's just the thinking behind gambling and how that parallels sports athleticism and finding something to fill the void when the year has come in which you're not gambling anymore. you know um, it's hard to admit defeat as well. And, chasing, which is the classic symptom of gambling disorder, is, a lot like, being behind in a game and trying to, catch up. And so that's accessible on Kalshi and FanDuel at any time that, the quick, accessible, purpose, the ups and downs, the chase. And that's just different than numbing out with alcohol or opiates. So I think athletes are particularly susceptible to just morph their competition and their drive into gambling disorder. And part of the therapy is to sit with the fact that, you didn't make it into the pros. You lost. You have a sense of grieving over the fact that you're not playing organized sports anymore, and the gambling didn't work out for you. And the old solution to recoup the losses by gambling again is, not available. So, there's a lot of that. And that's why I recommend both individual counseling and group counseling with other sports bettors, because it is like a team effort, and it does take a team. It takes the different perspectives of people that are overcoming gambling disorder with you, and that you're not in this alone.
Yeah, Mark, have you ever worked directly with gambling athletes?
Yes, I have. And sometimes it's innocent, but in most cases, again, what I see, and this is why when they say please gamble responsibly, we have no idea. A lot of it is a genetic component, that we often see not being understood. So it could be anybody, if there's a lot of gambling in the family, who knows whether or not it doesn't matter whether you're anywhere from any kind of athlete or any kind of normal human being, any kind of anybody can get addicted. Even, it happened with me. I have some problem gambling in my family. The first time I took a bet, I'm in, and it had no idea what my career was, what my school was, or anything else. So we don't know what's going on. And the fact is that a lot of athletes, the ones that make it to the pros have been coddled their entire lives. They don't think consequences are tied into them. Or again, just the way gambling addiction works, and Dan can talk a little bit more about the brain disease of it, is gamblers make really poor choices. And the more the risk, the riskier the thing. Even for an athlete, I can't even imagine the risk of trying to make a winning basket, of also trying to cheat the system. Uh, I mean, that's where the dopamine comes in. It's dopamine on top of dopamine.
And when we had that
Um,
young athlete get in trouble and please jump in over me, a couple of weeks ago, um, where he was betting on himself. And we
Yeah.
were talking about in group, right, that the dopamine is higher because imagine the rush you get from betting on yourself and then you go play the game.
Yeah.
Matt, yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things that's happened in the US since obviously like the repeal of PASPA and legalization of sports betting in the last 8 years or so has been the way that the sports governing bodies have basically become co-opted by the gambling industry, whereas in the past they were trying to, control the gambling industry's influence over the sport. I think they're very much partners. They're profiting from gambling as much as the gambling industry are. I think it leads to a very sort of disturbing scenario where the gambling industry can basically do what it wants. I think in terms of like offering what bets it's able to offer, how it's promoted, where it's promoted, when you've got the governing body that's basically been co-opted by that industry, then obviously it has a very corrupting influence in terms of kind of morally corrupting. Um, and I think, there are certainly some bets that are easier to fix than others. And if you had a sports governing body that was interested in sports integrity, first and foremost, rather than revenue shares with the gambling industry, then maybe they would stop those certain types of bets being offered. I think we're moving in that direction now with proposition bets. I think that there is a recognition in many states now, in the regulators in each state, that these are probably a bad idea. But there are lots of other things that are very easy to fix as a result of the gambling industry being able to just do what it wants. So I think it's been a big mistake, and I think that the governing body should never, the governing bodies, whether that's the NFL or Major League Baseball, whatever, they should never really become sort of aligned with the gambling industry to that extent. I think it's been a huge mistake. And giving a bit of money to NCPG, that's not going to do it. That's not going to do anything to deal with all of the problems that has caused. It's very, very upstream from you know giving a couple of million to a charity.
And
You
one of
know,
Yeah.
the things that bothers me about this, bedfellows between NCPG and these books is that there seems to be a real lack of understanding of how profound a gambling addiction can impact an individual. And there's a huge disconnect between the people affected by gambling addiction and these larger entities that are, creating these events and doing prevention efforts in a sort of vague way. People like Deb and I and Mark are, on the ground floor, seeing people on the daily basis, you know, 10, 20, 30 a week, individuals and families that are trying to climb their way out of this. And it's incredibly painful. It's, whether you have a lot of money, your family has a lot of money or not. It's a emotional, mental health issue. It's a strongly addictive product. And it takes a lot of effort on the entire family to get out of it. And people really just don't get the impact on families and how profound it is. And that, they need to wake up. There are people that are affected by it. There are people that treat it, and then there's everyone else, as far as I'm concerned. And I feel that everyone else are not doing the right thing by all of this intermingling and money exchange. They just don't get it.
I
Bob,
also,
I'm gonna
oh,
say, I'll
yeah.
go for it, Rob.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you like kind of follow where the money's being spent that gets donated, it also becomes even more apparent that it's kind of just like a facade. Not to say that this isn't also something that can be a problem, but I believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that the best funded prevention campaign for gambling in America is the Gift Responsibly campaign, which is you shouldn't give scratch offs to kids at Christmas, which is like, yeah, no questions. I guess we can all kind of get behind that, but is it the $2 scratch off at Christmas, or is it the AI powered FanDuel app that's getting you to come back and deposit your mom's credit card over and over? That's the problem we should be addressing. I don't know. It seems misaligned to me.
Yeah, I want to know more about that. Bob, I'm gonna come back to you, Rob, on that. Bob, you were gonna say,
I was just going to say, I've said this before, team sports where everybody on the team going in the same direction. They've completely destroyed the fabric of athletic competition. It's no longer about a team, it's about an individual. So there's 11 guys on a football team, and one of them goes, I better drop this next pass because I'm supposed to catch six. It's ridiculous. And I wanted to just say that's what's going on. And I try to share with young new members coming into the GA program, it's no longer about a team. It's about individuals and how they perform. And I just want to also throw in there is no such thing as responsible gaming once you cross the line. If and they're not interested in responsible gaming because if people were gambling responsible, they would be out of business.
if we could just explain to the public what responsible gaming is. Anyone like to take
Sure.
that, put that hat on?
Sure. Responsible gaming puts it on the client and not necessarily on the vendor. It's telling you to gamble responsibly without giving you much information of what that really looks like. I know I did a lot of work in casinos in California, and it's a little different. There was better signage. Everything was fairly obvious. There actually were in most casinos brochures that actually said what gambling responsible is. But again, I keep making this argument every week. I always believe that there are four pathways that there's no way we can predict whether or not somebody's going to gamble responsibly, and that's genetics, big win, big loss, or mood disorder. You know, any one of those four things can trigger, like really quickly, a gambling addiction. Or especially, you start, some people are going to be lucky in the beginning. In the old days, we used to go off for Dr. Robert Custer, who was like the father of problem gambling. He created the first inpatient treatment center in Brecksville, Ohio, for veterans that still goes on today. But he came up with a sort of a V chart where a lot of times it starts off with that winning. But the house has the advantage. They're not on all games. They're not spending all that money on marketing. They're not paying Kevin Hart and LeBron James and John Hamm and all these people money because they're losing. The same thing they always used to say in the casinos. Oh, look at that beautiful chandelier. Well, the gamblers bought that chandelier. We don't even know, where the money is going with sports betting. I know Matt might be able to tell better. I know, is FanDuel a UK company?
Yes, it's part of a company called Flutter, which originated in the UK. It's now listed on the New York Stock Exchange, but it was an Irish company. It owns brands like Paddy Power and Betfair, and there's loads of brands that are under its umbrella. But it acquired FanDuel pretty early on, in terms of the when the US started legalizing sports betting. Obviously, because they had all this data, people playing fantasy sports for years, and they thought, oh, they're going to have an advantage. So they acquired them, and it was, I think, the value of that company has exploded since they acquired it, obviously. So, yeah, but I think as we said before, the end game is not it's not sports betting, it's casino, and I think the bridge to that is obviously the direct marketing within the app, but also um, I think creating more and more opportunities to bet throughout the game. And it goes back to that point of what are the bets that are easiest to fix, and what are the bets that are kind of easiest for players to potentially manipulate, and offering that huge range of betting opportunities is to keep people engaged, to give people the opportunity to chase losses within the match if they start losing their first bet, and encouraging them to do so, giving them offers, free bets, and push notifications, and trying to just keep you in action. So it's completely distracting if you're thinking about, like, from the perspective of the sports governing body. It's not just, oh, this is a threat to sports integrity because of all these betting opportunities that, some of which are quite easy to manipulate. But it's also, I think, damaging genuine interest in the sport long term. Because if you just reduce it to a series of betting opportunities, then people sort of start to fall out of love with the game, right? Like, that's what's happened with a lot of young people in the UK. It's, watching football or soccer has become very stats driven and very analytical and very, like, I think that's because of the influence of the gambling industry. I think it's had a profound impact on how we consume and talk about sport, and it's not good.
You know what you said, though, I want to piggyback after what you said, because most of these companies, it's not just about, I think now, especially with all the competition, they're spending fortunes on advertising. They might even be a loss leader for their casinos. I'm seeing like a really change in people coming into treatment. Oh, I was a sports bettor. Now I'm an online slot and blackjack player. Why? That's usually you go the other way around. The game is quicker. I don't have to handicap. I don't have to think. And every time I push the button, I get instantaneous result. I don't even have to wait 10 seconds between pitches if I'm betting live game. And I think they're making a lot more money on the on online casino gaming. And I think it's a trajectory where gamblers are ending up, at the end of switching. I'll usually tell a client once they get there, I don't say it out loud like this, but they're toast, because now you have, a phone and an internet and gambling addiction, all put into one.
Rob, I feel like you were going to say something then.
So when I was 21, I was in New Jersey, and I think that New Jersey was the second state outside, well, the first state outside Nevada that got online casino in addition to online sports. So it's always been quite strange to me to hear people talk about them as separate things because from the moment that I started, it was one thing. But that was definitely the trajectory that I found myself on, was starting with sports to get onto the platform, and then you would see push notifications, advertising, free plays, all kind of pushing you further down the funnel, I would call it, towards the casino side. And one group that did this particularly well when I was gambling was DraftKings. Essentially, they would figure out like what's the games that this person likes to bet on. For me, it was mostly like NBA or tennis. And then they had specific casino games wrapped in branding of like basketball. And so what they would do is you would put a bet in on the Sixers game, and it would say something like bet $100 on the Sixers, get 25 free play for basketball blackjack. And that was kind of the funnel. And then that would turn into a slot machine that was basketball themed, and you would just get further and further down, and the bets that they would offer you, the free bets they would offer you, would drag you down that path. So I think that's the end game, of course, for casinos.
I was speaking to someone who has a gambling industry background last week, actually, and they were saying that the whole industry, the whole operation is geared towards getting you to spend more money. So obviously, like the amount of investment and um, products that they use and utilize to get that person to spend more, and all the data that they have on the customers. You mentioned 200 data points. That was something that we had found in our own work. All of this is geared towards getting you to spend more money. So you come along and you say, gamble responsibly. The NCPG saying, let's the operators funding NCPG, so encouraging responsible gambling. It's just that's not the way the industry works. That's not the commercial model of the sector. So if you're trying to reduce spend per customer for a particular cohort of customers, which is basically what the industry says they're trying to do, to kind of be compliant and to appear as though they're responsible themselves. That's one thing, but they're not doing that. When people are addicted, they're giving them VIP managers and they're giving them, more opportunities to gamble. And as I say, the whole culture of the industry is like driving revenue per user up. And there's so many sophisticated methods that they use to do that. And product is a very important component of that. And slots and blackjack and roulette and casino table games are extremely addictive. As extremely addictive content. So of course, like if you've got like lots and lots of people signing up to bet on sports, and I think you're right. I think in many cases it is a loss leader. I think that the offers are so good that they're not actually making much money out of that. They're just doing it to acquire the customer. Hopefully they'll make money from them in the long term, but eventually they will because they'll get the casino product or they'll get them onto it. I think that's basically the plan. And I think it's happening now. I think last time I looked, it was, I think 8 states had online casino. I think that they're more and more getting that legalized now. I think that that will be obviously something that they're going to try and prioritize.
Yeah, and they also understand that connection between the media, of delivering it. It's a lot different sitting at a casino playing roulette than sitting in your underwear playing internet, like again, being able to go faster and faster. It's about speed. It's about why poker went from stud to Texas Hold'em. The games are faster.
I'm wondering one day if there'll be universities are going to offer gambling programs like Gambling 101, how to get in the game and win. There's no such thing as winning. It's incredible.
Well, there are clubs in high schools. One of the people I counsel, it's investment and like used to be, pick stocks and learn about the stock market, the Dow and the New York Stock Exchange. Now it's about crypto and it's morphing into gambling, quote unquote, portfolios that are, being allowed in some high schools. And once it's got its grip on you, it really is hard to undo just that desire for action. And it's just a different kind of action than it was before PASPA. It's just so much quicker. It's so much geared towards live betting and now morphed into basketball slots and blackjack. It's incredibly addicting and very hard to treat, you know.
And that free play is just acquisition, as was just mentioned. I remember the old days when casinos came to New Jersey. I was in northeastern Pennsylvania, and they had these buses, like 9,000 buses for senior citizens, free trip to New Jersey to the casino, $50 free play, and then the atmosphere on the bus going there versus the atmosphere on the bus coming home. It was incredible. But that was the early acquisitions for seniors, free play.
Rob, changing the subject slightly, did you want to comment on the Bryce Harper story this week? Explain what happened, explain, the layers behind it.
Sure. So I'm a Philadelphia sports fan, and so we had Bryce Harper, who's like our best player, was just caught in, some would call it a scandal, but some would call it a misunderstanding. We don't quite know yet. But essentially, um, the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is like the local news, did a report on what had happened. And essentially, that there was this guy that was betting on FanDuel that was down maybe lifetime like $1.5 million, was expressing that he was wanting to slow down or wanting to stop gambling to his VIP host. And they essentially reactivated him by buying a Bryce Harper cameo for, I think it was like around $1,000. And having Bryce Harper basically wish the guy a happy Thanksgiving, and say it was from his VIP hosts. Her name was like Brittany or something. And essentially, what it appeared was that they were using him to re-engage a player that was expressing signs of gambling addiction. And now there's an active lawsuit pending from that person towards FanDuel, though I don't believe that Harper's involved. And what I was actually trying to figure out, and I just figured it out this morning, was like, could he have not known that they were using his cameo to re-engage this person? And I think the answer is yes. So, bias maybe that I like him as a baseball player, that I want him to not be the bad guy. But I was going to previously buy a cameo of a gambling influencer and have him basically say, Rob's right about everything. Like I'm wrong, and have him say that in the cameo. But it turns out that's illegal unless they know it's for business purposes. And so FanDuel and Cameo apparently have a ongoing partnership that facilitated this happening. So we don't know for sure if he knew that it was gonna be for business purposes, but he did say in the thing, like, your FanDuel host asked me to get this, so it didn't look good.
I mean, regardless, it just feels slimy to me, and it doesn't surprise me. This is a
Mhm.
slimy industry. Cowshy is slimy, and I think that's just, I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this. I felt for Bryce Harper, I wasn't convinced that he knew what he was being used for, as I'm not convinced that all athletes are aware of what they're being used for now. Uh, as we know, the public aren't aware of what they're being used for, right? So I don't know if anyone else had any comments on that story.
Well, just as a fan, as a Mets fan, I think it probably was slimy on his part, and that he knew everything that was going on, and he perpetrated the entire thing. But that's what's being, what I just said. You could still be a fan and not be a gambler.
Yeah, so when we first got started with Gamban, we worked with the industry because we wanted to promote Gamban, and we said to the gambling operators, put us on your website. That's where our users are. Ultimately they're going to see it. People that need it are going to see Gamban because if it's listed on a website, a gambling website. Some of them even paid to cover the cost of the licenses, and one of those was FanDuel and Flutter, the Flutter brand. But last year, we decided to end all relationships with the commercial gambling industry. And the reason we did that was because even though with something like Gamban, it just blocks gambling, it's a downstream intervention. There's nothing really that the industry can theoretically influence regarding the funding relationship. The the reason that we decided not to sort of part ways was just because of the sentiment among our user base of the gambling industry was just so bad. They did the way that they, I mean, you would kind of assume that to be the case, but it was so bad. And and some of the stories that we had when we were doing, interviews and surveys of our users were pretty harrowing. And it was exactly stuff like this. This is happening all the time. So I can't in good conscience sort of say, we're trying to help people, and then take money or endorse anything that is actually hurting the people we're trying to help in the first place. So I find that all I find, we've been on a bit of a journey as a business. I mean, me personally, I've always been very critical of the gambling industry, but I think it's just interesting, like the NCPG conference is later this month, and I know that they've come up a lot on this call, but one of the big sponsors of the NCPG is FanDuel. And FanDuel is engaged in these types of practices and these types of behaviors. And can the NCPG really, in good conscience, say, we'll take FanDuel's money and they're doing a great job. Thanks very much to our donors. When they know that they're hurting the people that they were set up to help. So I think we just have to have a very honest and open conversation about that, about the fact that the gambling industry is just not anywhere near where it needs to be in terms of protecting people, in terms of like the standards that it's setting. And this, yeah, as I say, this is just another really quite egregious example. And it made for a very good news story, I think.
To me, a comp is a comp. And whether you're giving it to a player or to keep them happy or giving them to an organization to keep them happy, there's an ulterior motive, motive certainly behind why they're giving money and giving money to all the state councils, everybody. And, I was at a meeting where, it was sort of everybody's feel good. Oh, look what we're doing with all this money. And I just said, wake up. I'm the pain in the ass. I'm the squeaky wheel, hopefully, usually at MPG, see, and have to make a lot of apologies to people because, I've been on the board, not on their board, but I've been a member for over 25 years. And the change in what happened there from being able to, and I'll probably get thrown out now that when I go in next week after saying all this, but I don't think I'm looking, nobody's on from NCPG, is it changed. It was originally started by people like me and Robert and Rob and Matt, of people who were in like a 12-step program that wanted to do more. And now that has morphed into some money-making organization that I don't understand anymore. It used to be about helping problem gamblers and their families. Now it's about mitigating gambling problems, which I don't know how you could mitigate a gambling problem. There's a new executive director. Hopefully she gets to figure out where the priorities are. But when they announced the FanDuel Awards, I'm going to be standing up and booing if they do that again this year. You'll see me, Matt. I got nothing to lose there. So yeah, and this was an organization that can greatly help. And the people in recovery there do our best. We do our best there. We wear buttons that say, I hate the term lived experience, but the people with lived experience are out there trying to help other people and getting to understand. It seems like most of the attendees are all on the same page. Me, Matt, Rob are on. I'm sorry if I put you in there, Rob.
Yeah, I just rescinded my membership about a month ago. I didn't renew, so I'm out now.
Yeah.
I've been involved for almost 33 years in GA and helping people, and I applied for a scholarship to come to this NCPG conference. If like a $300 or $400 to help me finance my trip, and they just got $2 million, $2 million, and I was rejected. I'm just throwing that out there, but I'm going to be there doing what I do the best, helping people.
I just
But
Uh,
Go for
It's
it. Go for it, Rob.
it's very expensive to make the trophies they have to give out to the DraftKings and FanDuel responsible gambling teams when they win
Yeah,
their awards at lunch. So that's why you couldn't come
yeah,
on scholarship.
yeah. I'm presenting next week on. I put together some PSAs on what problem gambling looks like. I hope my thing isn't canceled now when I get there. So, but I think it's us, and what we do here as being advocates, being able, I don't think any of us are against gambling. We're just against the way gambling is being presented, without any thought of we always talk about in our recovery, we gambled without the thought of the consequences. And, nobody's thinking about the consequences from a vendor point of view, no matter what they say.
You know,
Every time.
I don't think they know. I mean, as you know, will go in with this jacket and go straight in the middle of the industry and say the truth, right? But like, um, the thing about like the us as clinicians, as I'm always open about this. I'm not in recovery. Dan and I are not in recovery. We have not had a gambling problem. But we work directly with people every day who have had their lives destroyed. And we're talking about kids now. Problem is, we're talking about children now, right? And we've got the NCPG, and why people are up in arms about NCPG, National Council of Problem Gambling, because they're taking money from the industry. But who did they recently take money from? Kalshi. And what are Kalshi doing? It's a funnel for sports betting now. What does that mean? I had like two radio interviews last week, two newspapers contacting me, contacting Dan. What are you doing about this? We're doing our best. We're just simply social workers and clinicians. When you've got a 25-year-old with $1.5 million, and this isn't a simple case, but with sports betting, and he says, if I don't do something now, I will throw myself off a bridge. Or you have a client turn up to a session with a gun to his head, or you have a client who does jump off a six-story building. Um,
Or
who's
just the
who's
client that are dealing with the constant stress of,
mm,
long-term untreated gambling and then gambling disorder. I mean, it takes a huge toll on the body. And, tragically, we lost a client this week. And, although it wasn't, a self-harm, the cumulative stress of dealing with this and the secrecy behind it, and then coming clean with parents, and necessitating money or a bailout, or figuring out how to pay debt over time, and still having the impulse. You have to use your phone. It's not like alcohol where you can just rid your house of alcohol. The addiction exists on technology, and everyone needs a smartphone, so you're constantly managing the risk to grab your phone and to gamble. But it just really has dawned on me this week that this is not just a question of self-harm and suicide, but cumulative brain damage. That's not a clinical way to say it, but it hurts the brain. It causes stress, makes you vulnerable for, autoimmune disorder. And it's really tragic, and there's so much distance between NCPG and Kalshi, et cetera, and the actual impact on human beings. And that's what we're seeing in treatment right now. That's the real impact.
Yeah, and it's a shame. Once somebody crosses that line, that's it. It's the rest of their life. They're going to have to manage that problem. Most people can understand with alcohol that once you're an alcoholic, if you don't drink, you could have a great life. Um, but you have to work at it, and in most cases, addicts, especially gamblers, tend to have a sort of narcissistic type that think they could figure it out themselves. And we're not getting that message across that addicts need help. Addicts can't do it alone. And it's such a shame to watch young guys who I know for the rest of their life are either going to have to go to some 12-step meeting and go through some intense therapy, uh, certainly the therapy in the beginning, and go to meetings for the rest of their lives, or do something to maintain their abstinence. Plus, working with substance, and I work with substance and alcohol clients. They know they have to stop. They know there's no upside. The insanity of gambling is that you wake up in the morning with that hope every day that today is going to be different. And the amount of relapse is, I'm sure, way higher. And we don't even know what the prevalency rate is now for sports betting. Where in the old days it might have been 1 to 5% prior to mobile sports betting. Now it could be anywhere between 15 and 25%. And this is a whole bunch of young people. I think we were talking in the podcast last week over in Carlsbad, is also how it's going to affect people's lives in terms of saving. It's going to affect the entire economy. Because generally, when you buy something, even buying a phone, that money gets mixed around. The parts, everything else that goes into. We don't even know where that money is going, and that money is being taken out of the economic system. So I know I'm ranting a lot today, but working with clients, it just seems to get worse. I had breakfast with a sports bettor this morning. It gets worse and worse and worse, and without any consequences on the vendor's part.
Rob, I came on your podcast the other day, and I just wanted to ask, because Mark's been working in treatment for years. Me not as long, but as Dan said, on the ground floor with people that are having so the aftermath of a gambling disorder really is insidious into so many areas of life. I'm just wondering if there was anything from the other day's podcast that you learned or was of interest to you or just kind of stuck out for you.
Yeah, totally. There was one thing in particular that I was like, we need to hammer this point home because I had actually rarely heard of it. I think vaguely I heard of it, but I really didn't know much about it. Was like the intentions of why some people gamble. We know that in 12 step, they say that some people gamble intentionally to cause self-destruction or to harm themselves. But I had never really met anyone that fit that mold. And I've done like 150 interviews of gamblers on my channel, and I really just haven't had anyone say that. So it was the concept of masochistic gambler and the idea that I want to lose this money so that I can get to zero, so I can feel this intense feeling of having lost. Just the fact that that can happen is pretty scary because I think when I was gambling, a lot of the intention was quite the opposite. I wanted to win. I wanted to get money back. I wanted to increase. And so the idea that there's people going through that was something we dove into that I thought was terrifying. And maybe it's even worth giving a quick definition, Deb. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've become an expert in predicting consequences.
Dan, would you like to talk about masochistic gambling?
Well, there's definitely an impulse when you are on the way down. Let's say you started at $1,000 and you're up to 5 and now you're at 3 or something. There's just this intense disquiet, and there's kind of a knowing that as before, you're probably going to lose the 3,000 again. And that there's just this kind of pressure, and let's just be done with it already. And that's where you double down and start making foolish bets. So there's a descent downward that is masochistic in nature, and it only ends when the money's gone. And I don't want to say that it's pleasurable, but it's familiar, and there's a comfort in the familiarity. And at the point that the money's gone, it just stops by definition because there's no more currency to get back into action. And there's kind of just a exhausted relaxation effect that happens at that point. And now perhaps you're scheming to get more money or to get back into action and start the cycle all over again. But the hard part in gambling recovery is that once you've stopped for a little bit, now you're getting paychecks. 1,000 here, 1,000 there. It's never enough. It's not the potential to make $10,000, this weekend. So you have to coexist with the boring, methodical, consistent paycheck. So you're learning to manage your money and keep your expectations modest, but not get back into action because now you have $2,000 or $3,000, which could get you back, in the fantasy of making big money. So there are all of these elements of it, and managing money and working methodically and consistently without a huge potential for a payout is part of it as well. I was just talking to this morning someone, an older guy that's playing slots online. And he didn't come from a lot of money and fought his way to get to the point where he is now professionally. And he's gambling because he still identifies with that young, scrappy teenager that went to New York and tried to get a career for himself, which he did. But that feeling as a young person and fighting now that you've accomplished something is something that, counterintuitively you want to replicate. And gambling, unlike sex or drugs or something like that, can replicate that falling down the cliff feeling and then fighting back, which is something that I hear a lot when I'm treating gamblers.
I think it, Deb, and we talked about this after the podcast. I think it goes a lot deeper than that in terms of masochistic gambling. First of all, we talked a lot about that it might be childhood trauma related or other trauma related. You are really feeling bad, and you don't know why you're feeling bad. All that stuff is coming up, and your brain is saying, go get me something to fix it. And, I know for myself, because I gambled masochistically in a way of, okay, this is why I'm so effed up, is because I lost all my money. It's not because of something that happened to me in childhood. And that masochistic is a way of literally, and the GA program says subconsciously want to lose to punish themselves. And I think that element is really strong. Uh, Addicts generally have, I've been working with all kinds of addicts, they generally have screwed up childhoods and things happen. And especially in terms of relapse, the scenarios that you were giving, Dan, everything is going great. Now, how could I F it up? Oh, I know how to F it up. I know the perfect way. I've been doing it my entire life and effing it up that way. So I think it actually is a way of them saying, this is why I feel guilty. I just lost all my money. Not because I might, and this is not my personal story, not because I was molested as a kid, not because my parents told me my whole life I was no good. This will prove to me that I'm no good by losing money.
Well, and that kind of thing comes out in a long process in therapy, Mark. So people don't know why they feel bad. People do end up slipping into an addiction, generally because there is a gap to fill or a void to fill without knowing it. And so what we do is we really ask a lot of questions and yeah, meet the client where they're at. And I said this to you, Rob, what I do specifically, as Rob was really interested in what does a therapy session look like? I explain that it is very unique. Everybody is unique in how they gamble, in why they gamble, in their choice of gambling, and especially in their recovery journey. And, it stuns people in the process sometimes when they learn and they start to connect dots. Because with masochistic gambling, I've had clients tell me that they've been laughed at in a GA meeting because they will explain that they just didn't want to hold on to any money. I gambled to lose, and that shocks people. One thing that is confusing is that, and it sounds like it doesn't make sense, but you do get high when you win, you get high when you lose. That is anyone gambling. But having experienced people in treatment that would, have blown a lot of money, and you disassociate when you're at the poker table, you disassociate, you're not really there, right? You go and get more out and more out and more out, and you're not content until it's all gone. And if you know that there's 20 grand left in the bank, you've got to go get it out and lose that too. In the therapeutic process, we find that it is usually connected to some sort of and a very specific type of trauma, that happened in a time where someone had no control over what was happening to them. Now, that could be sexual abuse, that could be losing a loved one. And this is in Dr. Rosenthal's book as well, From Self-Deception to Self-Forgiveness, where he studied this. You kind of recreate this moment of no control subconsciously. And again, it's not that I want to do this and then I feel so guilty from it and I just want to, I call it burn the house down, or I call it go to your fuck it zone and lose everything and create your own fuck it. What you're actually doing is recreating a moment where you didn't have control. You don't know that until you get to treatment and start to do the work and do the digging to understand the why. Understanding the why is very important for everyone to get to the bottom of, any addiction, right? But it is interesting to people. It fascinates people. Why do we hurt ourselves? Then we start to understand gambling addiction as self-harm. To some people, it is self-harm, right? To some people, it is, I'm going to make money and I'm going to be the richest man on earth and this is how I'm going to do it. And another thing that came up the other day is young men want to make big money fast, right? At the moment. So that's a problem. But specifically masochistic gambling, wanting to just break everything, burn everything, do it quickly, recreating that moment where you didn't have control over something that was happening to you and around you couldn't escape from, or losing someone that you really loved, abandonment, that kind of thing, grief, deep grief. So it's really complex. Everybody is shuffled differently. Everyone's like a Rubik's cube shuffled in a different way when it comes to gambling addiction. So yeah, it is an interesting concept. Thank you, Rob, for bringing that up. And we had some great discussions, some deep discussion the other day in the podcast. Rob, if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat, your podcast, your platform. I know that you've got lots of people following you. You keep on top of current events. We do our best here at Stop Betting Sports, but you have a huge following. You have lots of people interested in your work. You're doing amazing work with the Gambling Truth Project. If you wouldn't mind dropping that in there too. So there is very specific folk in this area of gambling advocates and gambling advocacy. And people that volunteer their time, Matt, Rob, and Bob, Mark, Dan, us, all of us trying to do our best to educate the public on what's happening in the industry. Gambling Truth Project, if you wouldn't mind just, and when you come on again, Rob, I would like you to go into more detail about this, you, Matt, and Louis, but just give everyone a quick summary about the Gambling Truth Project.
Sure. So it's a nonprofit that we've put together with the aim of kind of calling out operator practices and saying these things that they're doing, these ways that they're advertising are essentially predatory. And then on the back end, the things that we'd like to see changed are essentially we're starting with the idea that some insurance companies don't actually cover gambling addiction treatment. It kind of leads further into this idea that it's not taken as seriously as other addiction issues are. So we're going after that. And right now, the method by which we're going to start doing it is a PSA that is currently in the works. I actually have a meeting about it tomorrow, so I'd probably be in a better place to tell you where it's at the next time that I come on. But thank you for letting us share.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone else want to bring anything up? As today on the Sunday Project, we are wrapping early, so we're gonna stop just in a second. But anyone else wanna bring anything to the table? I know we're coming on soon. We're going to have Louis. How do you say his second name again, Rob?
Ruggiero.
Ruggiero coming on again. He is passionate about letting everyone know about the NCPG and how, for me to hear a gambler who's really worked hard on himself in recovery, doing the work, feel so strongly about that everyone must know this and understand this. For me, I just feel so grateful. Not everybody is in it for the right reasons, and I'm just so grateful to Louis for being Louis with his voice, with his passion, with his drive, and can't wait for him to come on again. And Danny Funt, Danny Funt is coming on again. Kate will come on again. So everybody that's come today, thank you again, attendees, for being in the audience. We really appreciate you. Spread the word about the Sunday Project. Thank you, guests. Have a good rest of the Sunday. See you soon.
Thanks, Deb.
Everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Deb.
you,
See you.
guys. Take care. Bye.